Hello and welcome to the UK Wildlife Podcast. I'm Neil Phillips.
And I'm Victoria Hillman.
It's a new year. We started to start afresh almost with this podcast. We're going to try and be a bit more
Organised.
organised, that's the word. We have proper agenda and everything. Well, we'll start with the news, I think. Podcast news. We have podcast news. We've been going long enough to have podcast news now. We have passed 500 downloads, so thank you everybody who's been listening. In fact, we're nearly at 700 now. And two people have posted 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcast page. So thank you very much for that.
That's great news.
It's good, isn't it?
And we're starting to get a few more kind of inquiries and questions starting to come through as well, and more people involved. So yeah, really good.
It's exactly what we want, isn't it? So you've had a little trip.
Yeah, I spent 10 days in Germany with my brother and his family over there. Didn't really see any wildlife, but we did go to the museum, saw the pretty amazing amber collection they have in the museum at Stuttgart, which includes I think it's a frog. There's one of a bit of a lizard, I think, and various insects and other invertebrates. So a pretty cool collection.
Yeah, I like a bit of amber.
Yeah, so that was kind of what I've been doing the last 10 days. I actually only got home a couple of days ago, so yeah,
yes,
straight back to work.
As a paleontologist, I feel the need to point out that you cannot clone dinosaurs from stuff in amber. But yes, I've been fairly busy over Christmas. Did all the family stuff. I did actually manage to get out 3 times, all which were quite productive. I sat in the photographic hide at Rainham Marshes and had a sparrowhawk land so close I could only photograph its head, which was rather cool. I went up to a reservoir in North Essex called Abberton, Essex Wildlife Trust Reserve. And there's a cattle egret hanging around up there, and I managed to photograph that sitting on the back of a sheep, which is, obviously when I've posted it online, people saying it should be a sheep egret, as you might imagine. And there was an annoyingly elusive hen harrier. 3 times it came up. Got a good view, probably my best views ever, but I never quite managed a photo of them. So that's pretty good. And in the new year, I popped over to Rainham Marshes again and got a kestrel set up on a tree quite close. So I've done all right already so far this Christmas time. So
yeah. Making up for both of us, doing it for both of us right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm probably stealing your photographic luck, I think. I've also been arguing with people on Facebook as well, which is not a hobby of mine, but it happens. Did I tell you about this? The strange lady. I was on I think it was Wildlife Ponds UK. Really nice group if you like your freshwater stuff, by the way. But when you've got 4,000 members, you're going to have a few odd ones. I think she got booted out after this, but I posted a picture of a grass snake, and she posted in bold a warning about how they're dangerous to your pets and they're poisonous. And I politely pointed out, and I did politely point out that she was wrong and that she shouldn't really be scaremongering about snakes. And she went ballistic and ended up sending me horrible messages through direct messages from my page and stuff. So the wonders of the internet.
Oh yeah, the joys of social media sometimes.
Yes, but she got booted from the page. So crazy people. Apparently she worked for the RSPCA, so she knew what she was on about. I don't think she did really work for the RSPCA, because most of the people I know who work for them know what they're on about, and she didn't.
Yeah, I'd question that, I think.
Yes.
But there we go.
I wouldn't mind, but they're not even venomous grass snakes, are they? So
No.
Never mind.
No, I think some wires have been crossed somewhere along the lines.
Yeah. Never mind.
I think we've got a bit of a follow-up and feedback as well, haven't we?
Yeah. Did you want to cover that?
Well, you can go for this one.
Okay then. My friend Graham has been in touch. You may remember he asked a question about getting adults into wildlife. A bit of follow-up from our last episode. For those who haven't heard it, it was on Christmas wildlife. He's talking about the association of robins with Christmas. He says it's probably because, well, at least partly because they're much more visible and audible during December, and one of the most visible ones as well. So, yeah, he says he had one singing quite audibly in the shrubbery outside Morrison's in Corringham, which is in Essex, the past week. And I have to say, I've noticed quite a lot of singing recently. Last week, I don't know if you've noticed anything in the garden, Victoria, with the birds.
to admit I haven't. So I only got back a couple of days ago and
Oh,
was
yes.
tied to my computer, working on something all day yesterday. And to be fair, it's been raining on and off most of today, and I haven't really
Oh,
looked in the garden, if I'm honest.
I can't blame. Yeah, the great tits today and yesterday were doing the whole the calls and singing that they do in spring. So that was and snowdrops are coming up as well. So spring is
Well,
on its way.
it's not unusual to get snowdrops coming up at this
Oh,
time
of
of year,
course
though.
not. No,
Certainly,
they're winter flowers, aren't they?
they
But
are a winter flower. Although I have to admit, I did have a quick check in the garden
mm,
when I got back, and a lot of like some of my trees have got buds on, and there's some stuff starting to come up which really shouldn't be coming up just yet. So it looks like it's been quite mild while I've been away. Let's put it that way.
oh,
So
excellent.
I
Yes.
think we have a couple of questions as well, don't we? So I'm going to let
Yes.
you. First up, we've got one from Alan, and I'm going to let Neil answer this one because I think he knows a little bit more about it. But Alan asked, or mentioned actually, that when he was younger, kestrels were fairly common and buzzards were less common, but now it seems to be the opposite way around. Has something changed in nature to cause this turnaround?
Yes.
Neil, over to you.
Well, I've been aware of this. This is a question, sort of one of those ones that comes up every so often. And the short answer is we're not quite sure, I believe, is what I've heard in the past, and done a bit of research around this. There has been implications that the buzzards are either directly competing or even predating the kestrels, and that I don't think well I don't think, and I think the consensus is it's probably not the case. It might be maybe intensification of farmland, but then has it changed that much in the last sort of 10, 20 years? I mean, maybe because they're dependent on vole populations. The kestrel numbers do go up and down. I have to say, there's quite a lot around at the moment. Certainly in North Kent and South Essex, I've seen quite a few. They seem to be doing okay. Voles they feed on voles and lizards and stuff like that. And vole populations are going up and down, up and down. You'll notice the same with barn owls and short-eared owls. Their numbers vary with that as well. Whereas buzzards tend to eat sort of carrion, rabbits, and quite a lot of earthworms. You quite often see them sitting in the field eating earthworms. So competition, there's probably a bit of overlap in prey, but could it be that? Who knows? There's been a few ideas suggested. One of them is the use of rodenticide, to kill rats and mice, the poison people put down. Again, I don't think we know for sure. The RTB have been doing some research into it. I did find a few suggestions they've made. They've got a nice web page on it. They think a wetter climate might be having an impact. They are suggesting predation from buzzards, ravens, and goshawks could be a possibility. They've got to compete for nest sites with barn owls and jackdaws, and habitat change. The short answer, as I said, is we don't know for sure. But I'm going to look into it a bit more and hopefully come back to this question at a later date in our new follow-up section.
It does
So
sound like it's,
yeah,
potentially a combination of factors rather than it being, one single factor.
most of the time
Yeah,
it is, isn't it, with these wildlife declines? It's
yeah,
sometimes it's like
it's not one thing, is it? It's a
yeah,
combination that.
sometimes one big thing sort of finishes them off or really has an impact. But usually there's been some cause of decline beforehand of a lot of these things. We've got another question as well, haven't we? I believe.
We have, and it was actually come through on Twitter, and probably a good time to mention actually, if you do have any questions, you can contact us through either the Twitter page or our Facebook page. But this is from Liquid Tweeter. They basically asked they've got a cherry laurel in their garden, and they're thinking about taking it out, as they don't think it adds much wildlife value to the garden, and possibly replacing it with something native like a holly. And they've just asked whether, for our advice, whether it's worth keeping the laurel, or changing it. And I actually did a bit of research on cherry laurels in particular, and they actually do provide, quite a lot of wildlife benefit. They do, more so if it's a hedge. There's a lot of potential for birds to nest in it. It's a good habitat, and also underneath as well, where you get the leaf litter, for invertebrates, potentially like amphibians as well might use it. When they flower in the springtime, they produce some of these small white flowers, but they're really good for flies, ants, wasps, and bees. They'll all use those. And the berries actually provide a food source for birds in kind of late summer, autumn time. So, to be honest, I think, possibly keep it. If it's flowering and producing berries, it's, potentially is actually quite a good, wildlife habitat for lots of different species. I think if you did want to replace it with anything, then maybe holly would be a good
Mm,
shout,
yeah.
because that does also produce, the flowers and the berries and that for wildlife. But I don't really see any reason to take it out. It's, keep an eye on it and have a look and see in the spring, when it flowers, are there lots of insects and invertebrates and that using it? And do the birds use it for nesting in? So I hope that answers your question.
Well, one random side note of laurel is it has a cyanide within the plant, so you have to be quite careful when you're burning it because the smoke can be pretty toxic, as you probably imagine.
Yeah, yeah. So do be
So
careful if you do
yeah,
want to remove it. Just
yeah.
be really careful as well. And we actually had one more through. It actually came through my website from Grace. She's just saying she absolutely loves the podcast, really enjoying it. So thank you very
Thank,
much for your
yeah,
lovely
thanks for that.
comments, Grace. And she's actually put a couple of questions towards us, or to us.
Mm.
So the first one is, what was our first real back garden wildlife experience? So I'm going to let you go first on this one, Neil.
Oh God, when we don't go to I do remember my dad getting me up. I can't have been, must have been 8, 9 years old, something like that. My dad getting me up one, just as the sun was going down one in May or June after evening, because there was a stag beetle next door and a magpie had picked it up, and all I could see was this black dot on the far side of the neighbour's garden. Hardly a a great view. I had much better views later in life, thankfully, of them in the same garden. That's probably the first one I can think of. Or perhaps seeing a woodpecker in my neighbour's tree as well. But yeah, no, I
Oh,
can't say. That's the oldest I can remember in my personal back garden, anyway.
well, I have to confess, I did actually ask my mum about this, because I don't really, for various reasons, I don't really have many memories of growing up. Um, so I did ask my mum this afternoon and said that when I was 18 months old, we actually built a pond in our back garden. And that really started my love of pond life, smaller creatures, a lot of invertebrates, and also my love of frogs.
Mm,
So it started when I was 18 months old. So that was really my first real back garden wildlife experience. And I think ever since, every garden really that we've lived in, or every house we've lived in that's had a garden, we've had ponds, um, and frogs and wildlife, and we've always tried to keep it very wildlife friendly. So I think that would be my first real back garden wildlife experience.
yeah, probably about the same time. I think not as long ago as you, but
All right.
uh, oh, no, I wasn't as young as what I meant. Although of course you're older than me. Moving swiftly on. I do remember catching newts in my garden pond. We didn't have frogs. I think we had frogs born once because I think because we had newts and fish in the pond till a local cat ate them all, which started my dislike of cats. Um, no, but that definitely inspired my. I could tell you every species in that pond. We have water lice, pond olive mayflower, which I'll come back to later, goldfish, common toads, smooth newts, the occasional common frog. I say they have frogs. I mean, they did have lots of them. Um, Leeches, probably brown leech, Eropabella. Oh, I didn't know the name back then, obviously. And it wasn't much in there because of the fish. And I'm sure there's something else. Oh, I'll probably be thinking of the newt tadpoles. But yeah, so it wasn't diverse. And I used to catch stuff with a jar with a string tied around it, which is highly ineffective, I can tell you now. Um, or just catch newts with my hand. I got really quite proficient at that. And catching crickets, which I still can do today, as I've shown off many times in front of school children at work. But yes, I did actually catch a newt in front of some kids. That was quite cool. I haven't tried catching a great crested newt with my hand. I'm not sure I'm licensed to do that. I tend to use the net. But yes, yeah, I think catching newts in the pond's another bit cliche, that isn't it? Catching newts in a pond, but that'll probably be an early memory for me as well. I might think of an earlier one. I might mention it in the next podcast if I do.
You have to get thinking.
Mm.
And there was another question that she put to us, and that was, what surprises us about the wildlife world? Which I think is actually a tougher one.
Sometimes it feels like everything.
Yeah.
It's sort of I'm sort of so constantly either new discoveries or new to me discoveries. We'll talk about one with the pond olive mayfly. When I found out about it, I was like, what? This really common insect and people don't know it can do this. Um, things like frog hoppers have working gears. Do you know that on their
No,
legs?
I
That's how they
didn't.
spring so high. Um, so many things. Just swifts not landing for 2 years. That was a nice fact someone told me. They take off from the nest and they don't land, don't touch the ground for 2 years. They sleep on the wing, everything. Um,
Yeah, I think for me it's just the constant discoveries that we're making. Just the sheer beauty of wildlife. I mean, I'm particularly fond of my amphibians and reptiles, as people have probably gathered by now.
mm,
Um, and I think that, I don't know, that just, I don't know, just like the beauty, the interactions, the resilience of some wildlife actually as well. That really does surprise me.
yeah.
Um,
Yes. How it's hang, but the amount of wildlife in the middle of London would be a good surprise. I'll tell you one surprise that surprised me. I think that's English. Um, was here's a fun fact. A lot of people don't realise. Do you realise that whales and dolphins are technically hoofed mammals?
I did.
Yeah, it's a cool fact though, isn't it?
It
When you
is cool
first find
fun.
out, you're like, "What?" And then you think, "Hold on, if they evolve into something like a hippo, in fact, which is one of their closest relatives, that kind of makes sense because it's amphibious, and then they start swimming." And when you think about it, and especially when you look at the fossil record, it, I mean, that was a creationist favourite sort of, "Oh, that's where evolution didn't happen," because 20 years ago the fossil record for whales was pretty poor, and now we've basically got sort of hippo-like animals all the way down through sort of side branches into crocodile-like ones and more seal-like ones, and just that's amazing. Yeah, I mean everything surprises me, but then nothing surprises me at the same time because it's so you almost expect surprises these
Yeah,
days. But
it's a bit of a weird one, but
yeah,
yeah, I think yeah, pretty much kind of everything and to a point, nothing. I don't know. Yeah. But there we go, Grace. I hope
everything
that
and
helped.
nothing.
You've kind of put us on the spot with that one, so I hope that
Yeah,
kind of helps answer your question. Um, but there we go. So, yeah, big thank you to everyone that has sent in questions or comments. Please do keep them coming in. So if you
yes,
want to get in touch through the Facebook page or on Twitter using our hashtag, which we will mention a little bit later.
even if you
But
just want to shout out.
yeah, just if you want to shout out, drop us a message, and we can give you a shout out. No
or
problem at all.
or tell us something you've seen to make us jealous.
Yeah, yeah, that too, definitely.
As long as you're willing to be insulted by me I'll be nice. Depends what it is.
He'll be nice.
Yeah,
I'll make sure he's nice. Don't worry.
yeah, she will. I'm scared of
um,
her.
Not that scary.
No, you're not, but I'm still scared of you. Right. Um. So, shall we move on to wildlife news? I
Yeah,
think
yeah. And touch on the news, and then
yes. We'll start with. Should we start with that rather than a lot of people would have seen this, but it's just after we'd recorded last podcast, the seal pups at Winterton Dunes up in Norfolk. In the space of a weekend, 3 died due to idiotic actions. I think it's a nice way of putting it, by human beings. One died when they didn't go into the details, but it was basically the pup. Basically, what happens with seals is they come onto the beach. The females give birth. They feed up the pups with really rich milk over, I think it's a week or two or so. So it's not very long. And then the seals are left to fend for themselves. They shed their white, lovely, fluffy coat and go off and swim. But until they shed that white, fluffy coat, they can't swim, basically. They'll drown if they get in the sea. And they have to feed regularly, obviously. One died from basically being starved to death because the mum won't approach the pup while there's people nearby. There has been issues with photographers getting too close to stuff in the past, but from the sounds of this, now I am just speculating a little bit here. It sounds like people with mobile phones standing around it taking pictures and selfies, probably. That's
Yeah,
the
I think it's
impression I
really
got.
important to stress at this point that it does sound from these articles, and from what I've heard from people that have actually been there
Mm,
and were there recently, or recently to when this happened, it's not professional photographers.
mm,
This was just beachgoers, people with mobile phones, and I've seen some crazy stuff myself.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think it's really important to stress that it's general people
yeah,
that have actually caused
mm,
this, because I know, and you've probably seen the same, Neil. There's been a massive backlash against photographers
yeah.
photographing
Bas-
seals as a result of this.
I'll come back to that, I think. Basically, a second seal pup died when some idiot let their children chase it into the sea and it drowned. And a third one died when it was attacked by a dog, which is a subject we'll come back to in a bit. Understandably, people were very upset about this, but people were posting pictures from another seal colony called Donanook, where you can photograph them from the other side of a fence, and the seals will come right up to the fence. And yeah, unless you're stupid enough to stick your fingers through or something, people are safe and seals are safe. Everyone's happy. People are posting pictures and getting frankly abusive comments. And I did go on and stick up for a couple of them and pointed it out. And to be fair, some people were like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realise. I was just very worried." And it's kind of an understandable reaction to some degree, but people should be careful not to just assume the worst all the time. Yes, there are idiots among wildlife photographers, as there are in all groups. Yes, it seemed a bit harsh on some of the people that had, taken the trouble to follow the wildlife code. Someone else was telling me they went up to, I think it's Horsey, which is, I don't know if it's still part of the same colony as Winston, because it's very sort of similar area and they stretch
Yeah.
along the beaches, these colonies. He said he sat down quite away from mum and pup, and the pup came right up to him, and he just stayed where he was before then slowly backing off after getting a couple of shots. So even if you see someone sitting next to a seal pup, you don't know for sure if they've gone up to it or not. Yeah, if you are, then a pup comes up to you. Once you take a few shots, the good thing to do is obviously back off, then, isn't it? But
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
I just stay away from the beaches now. I can't bother to deal with it all.
I mean, yeah, I do feel sorry for a lot of the photographers that have, they have been victims of this massive backlash against, wildlife photography, the seals. But that there are ways that you can do it sensibly, and what, with most photographers, they're using long lenses. You're talking about 400-500 mm lenses. And like Neil said, I've actually experienced that myself. I've been sat there some distance from the seals, and the pups come to investigate. Some of them are quite inquisitive, and they will come up to you. And if that happens, you just need to back off slowly and carefully, and away from the direction that they've come in as well. So just back off and find somewhere else to sit and watch, and just be sensible about it, to be honest. And I think, if you've got any concerns, what I'd say is just kindly and politely just ask the photographer, because the majority of them be more than happy to tell you, the situation. And I know certainly for myself, and I'm guessing for Neil as well, very open about that kind of stuff. If someone wants to ask me how a particular picture was taken, and whether it was taken responsibly, then I'm more than happy to have a sensible conversation with someone about it. But real emphasis on the word sensible, because the moment somebody starts attacking you as a photographer, then I'm not going to give you the time of day if you can't approach me politely about it. And I'm very open. I've been to Winterton. I was there actually just over a year ago, photographing the seals with a zoom lens. And you can get some great pictures. And I can tell you now that most of my pictures were taken probably about 500 mm on a crop sensor as well. So it's even further. So.
Yeah, you're nowhere near them then, because they're quite big animals. So
yeah, and to be honest, you don't really want to get that close. Their breath really smells.
yeah. Oh, I can't smell it, but I'd be more concerned about those sharp teeth they have, which apparently in the past people have gone, oh, cute little seal pup, and ended up in A&E.
Yes.
Which serves them right, quite frankly. Yes. In summary, don't be a around seals. I might have to. I'll bleep that out. And B, please don't go around accusing photographers of not caring about wildlife, because it's pretty much the worst thing you can say to us. which
Yeah,
is what
I
I did
mean,
point out to people on Facebook.
I think
Uh,
yeah, just don't don't go around
mm,
just accusing people willy-nilly. Find out the facts, have a chat to the photographers. Like I said, most of the photographers, certainly all the wildlife photographers I know, we'd be
yeah,
more than happy to have a sensible conversation with anyone about how images are taken. So you just ask.
yeah,
We're just regular people. Just ask us. And that leads quite nicely onto our other news
yes.
story.
There was a really it's quite a well written argument, and I think to be fair to her, a lady called Melissa Harrison wrote an article. I'm not sure if it's in the magazine proper. I didn't see it in there, but it's on the BBC Wildlife magazine website, and it's about dogs in nature reserves. And she made a quite reasonable argument, I think, that dog owners should be allowed to take their dogs into nature reserves, and the basis of which is a lot of people outside are dog walkers, which is fair enough. And you want to get as many people as possible into nature. So if you let dog walkers into nature reserve, they're more likely to get into nature, which is again a fair argument. But on the flip side, I've spent I've had a career working in country parks, nature reserves, and spent a lot of my free time in them as well. And I've seen firsthand a lot of the damage that's been done. And well, I don't know. Did you want to say anything in particular on this one, Victoria?
Well, I know from like my local reserves, so some of them you're actually not allowed to take dogs at all, because there have been problems in the past, particularly with where the otters are doing really well. Yeah,
Mm,
you actually you cannot take dogs on parts of the reserves. Other parts of the reserves, it says you can pass through. You can walk through the reserve on the main paths with your dog as long as it's on a lead. Um, yeah, and I've actually met some really lovely people, and you really got to know some of the dog owners and the dogs actually when I've been out on some of the reserves. And generally speaking, a lot of them are responsible. The dogs are very well behaved. The owners clean up after their dogs. The owners themselves, they're out when they're walking their dogs, they're doing wildlife surveys as well while they're out there. So there's a real
mm,
benefit to them being out there because they're maybe on those reserves every single day, something that the rest of us can't afford the time to be at the same reserve, but they maybe go to that reserve every day to walk their
exactly.
dogs, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They see the changes and they record them, and that's really important for us as you know wildlife biologists, conservationists to know what's happening. So there's a real positive side of it, but I've also seen the negative side as well, where I've actually come close to being, well, I have been, attacked by dogs on a nature reserve. Thankfully, one was actually muzzled, and I did actually throw a tripod in the direction of the other one. Yeah, I didn't hit the dog, but it was enough to warn the dog away from me. And this is on a reserve. This dog was muzzled. It was a big dog as well, obviously really quite aggressive. And I was actually out surveying adders and bees.
Mm,
Probably two very weird things to survey at the same site, but
God.
they're both there in looking for particular species. And I'd actually stopped because I'd actually hadn't seen this male adder to start with, and he would, and then I was looking for this. I was following this bee, and I was trying to get an idea on the bee, and I saw this adder, so I just stopped, you know, backed off ever so slightly, and this dog, I looked up, and this dog just clocked me and went for me, and it actually, I didn't realize until it was closer that it was muzzled, and it actually went to attack me, and I just moved my camera, put my camera by my hip, and it just went straight in, smacked my camera, and actually end up bruising all down, the side of my hip, and I don't bruise easily. I had a big bruise from
Mm.
that, and that's the negative side of it. And at that same reserve, we get dog walking vans. I've seen vans pull up, they open the back
Oh
doors,
yeah.
20 dogs get out. Not one of them is under control. They're tearing through vital wildlife habitats. And in the springtime, when you've got, adders and grass snakes and that out basking, and, not one of them is under control. And, the mess that is then left on those reserves. And it's, that mess is toxic. It can change the pH of soils.
Yeah.
It have a real negative impact. So I think it's a really hard one. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I don't think banning dogs completely from nature reserves. I don't know, but it's where do you draw the line? I think it's a tough one.
It is. I mean, when I posted about this on my Facebook page, I wrote off the top of my head what things I've witnessed, and I've been threatened and working. I was never even a warden. I was just in the education. I've had groups of kids with me and had huge Alsatians coming up, and I'm trying to get these kids to enjoy the outside, and it's not scary, it's great. And then a huge great Alsatian comes up. The owner's got the option of going down a different path or through the field with the kids, and they go through the field with the kids, cover them in mud. I've had kids pushed into nettles. You can see the situation where a kid gets pushed over, dog jumps up, pushes kids over, cracks its head on a rock or a log, and God knows what's going to happen then. That aside, I mean, just the wildlife aspect, they're going to ponds and ditches, stir them up, they're destroying the vegetation, disrupting breeding amphibians. And I've seen it time and time again. I mean, a whole load of ponds in an SSSI, the water's just brown and there's no vegetation because there's a constant stream of dogs going through them, and it never settles. They're not ecologically dead, but all the rare stuff's not in there. The owners, you put signs up, telling them there's rare animals in the pond, please keep them out, and the signs get ripped down. Unlike the signs asking people to pick up litter and stuff. I mean, this is the thing that annoys me, is that they instantly switch on to the. Not all dog owners, I have to say, the majority are pretty good. Not perfect. I'd say the majority aren't as good as they should be, but most of it's not sort of, terrible stuff. You try and talk to be reasonable with some of them, and they instantly switch into your job's worth, or what about cats, or what about the people dropping litter, and it's kind of, well, the litter's bad, but it's not chasing around breeding birds, is it? And I've seen squirrels killed. We had a fox killed at one place I worked. A fox cubs. A dog just jumped on it and killed it. If you go to, I just don't bother going to Richmond Park anymore. It's funny. A certain ethical photographer, or self-proclaimed ethical photographer, got the Guardian to write a story on photographers harassing the deer. But when you actually looked at the press release, it was talking about dogs getting attacked by deer in the rut because people won't control their dogs. Richmond Park lose, I think it's tens of deer calves and fawns to dogs every year. And you just wonder, in the New Forest, the New Forest Dog Owners Association resisted moves to ban dogs from the breeding areas of wading birds. And if they're not already, the curlew is going to go extinct as a breeding bird in the New Forest because of disturbance and refusal from dog owners to control them. I mean, I could go on and on. But people think I hate dogs. I actually quite like dogs. It's just some of the owners are just selfish. There's no way around it, really, is there? It's just really sad, really, because in ideal world we would let dog owners in, but even where dogs are meant to be on lead, or you've got a dog area in a nature reserve, it's ignored. Both reserves I've been to with dog areas, the dogs are using, or the owners, not the dogs, I should say, the owners are using every path except the one put there for them. It's just really sad. One of my local reserves has got a lovely dog loop to walk your dog in near the car park, nice field to let your dog run around in, well, it's meant to be on a lead. And the rest of the paths are covered in dog poo because they refuse to stick to where they're meant to. It's just, and the one argument given, of course, is that if you keep on a lead, it's okay. But there is actually studies done that show that even on a lead, they cause more disturbance than a person on their own. And what's the other argument is children. Oh, children cause more disturbance, but if you've got a ditch either side of the path, the child isn't going to cross it. I mean, ditch full of water. Whereas I've seen dogs swim across it. I've seen people lift their dogs over anti-predator fences, running around chasing all the breeding birds. It's just. Yes, it's a never-ending onslaught, and I've never met a warden. Oh, I have met wardens, but they own dogs themselves. That hasn't had a positive attitude on dog owners, put it that way. So
yeah, I think it's a very passionate area. I think it's something that Neil and I have discussed. We'll probably cover in greater detail, and actually maybe dedicate a whole episode to nature reserve dogs, and how people and pet owners should behave. And that's, I think, generally, because I would say as well, it's like I said, I there's one particular reserve that I go to in the summer, and almost every time I go up there, I meet the same guy and his dog, and we have a long chat, and he walks the path every day, and he lets me know what he's seen and how things are going and how things have changed, and and his dog just. Okay, his dog's quite elderly now, so she just kind of bimbles along the path. She never leaves the path, and if when he stops to chat and when we have a chat, she just lays down on the path and waits for him. So it's there's always positives and there's always negatives, and I think it's a really hard one. I don't think there's a right and wrong answer. I don't think an outright ban is going to work, but maybe there's a way.
Yeah, I say if we do ban dogs from, I think anything that's got an SSSI status, as long as it's one that's valid, I don't think there's an argument to take the dog on it. Well, again, it's going to depend on the reserve, isn't it? But
Mm.
anything with even remotely sensitive wildlife, I'm afraid, shouldn't have dogs on. But something that's more sort of country parky, maybe, and you have fenced off areas and stuff like that. I mean, there's reserves nobody's allowed in because it's so sensitive. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, which is quite right in my book. But if you ban dogs somewhere, you've got to have places for them to walk as well.
Yes.
Well, the thing I'll never understand, and this is one of my friends brought this up to me, and and he's a dog owner, or he was actually, and he said he never understand why people drive for literally sort of half an hour to get to a nature reserve to let their dog walk around. And it's all well and good saying I want to enjoy the nature, but if you're flushing it and destroying it, that's kind of selfish, really, isn't it? Really, when they must pass so many good places, more suitable places to walk the dog, and then I don't leave the dog at home. And there seems to be this almost culture that if you go for a walk in the countryside, you've got to have a dog and have it running off ahead of you, and like Lady of the Manor or Lord of the Manor. And I just, yeah, I don't get it. That
Well, I
said, I'd
think
love to have a dog if I didn't work full time.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they are great company. I grew up, with a dog, and we would take him for walks, and we were always, there were some places that we just wouldn't take him because it wasn't appropriate to take him. But I know in the fields around, certainly around here, that where you have a lot of dog walking now, those fields, they used to be full of wildlife. We would get grasshoppers and crickets and butterflies throughout the summer, and now the pH levels of the soil have changed so dramatically due to the amount of dog mess that's just being left. They actually can't even graze cattle on the fields anymore. The reality is those fields are actually going to probably be built on, and they'll build housing estate on it. I remember growing up and looking out the window, and there would be cows on it or sheep on it, and now it's just kind of been left because the pH of the soil has changed so much that it's almost dead. There used to be orchids growing in those fields, and there's just nothing anymore. So, I think it's certainly something that I think maybe we can cover over a whole episode for sure.
We've half filled this one with it already, but
We have,
yeah.
That's what I think.
So I think we better move on. So shall we move on to our main topic?
I think we should, yes.
Yes. So the main topic, as promised, is ponds in winter.
Probably unsurprisingly, Neil's going to take the lead on this one, although he did leave the amphibian stuff for me to have a chat about afterwards.
That'd be nice. Right, so ponds in winter, obviously it gets cold. On land, most insects and vertebrates have disappeared. Not disappeared, they're either eggs or pupa or adults tucked out of the way. It's surprising, I've done pond dipping when the pond has been pretty much frozen over and caught plenty of things. One of the first times, and not the first time, I caught a great silver water beetle was under the ice. For those who don't know, that's the biggest insect in Britain. You think the size of a stag beetle, so a couple of inches long, sort of 5, 6, 7 centimeters long. Massive, great thing. Well, for Britain anyway, an insect. So how do these animals survive? Well, one thing you have to remember is in the UK, our ponds, unless they're extremely shallow, so less than 6 inches, which, well, I suppose the dry winters we've had, they might have been. Not this winter, though.
No.
The pond will not freeze solid. So there's always going to be some liquid water at the bottom. And a lot of groups have taken advantage of this. Things like caddisflies, dragonflies, damselflies, mayflies, and in streams, stoneflies and stuff like that. They overwinter as aquatic larvae. That's where the dragonflies are gone, with the exception of perhaps some of the migrant hawkers possibly, and red-veined darters, which are a small red species, which migrate south as adults. Most of them will overwinter as nymphs in the pond. There is exceptions to all that. Mosquitoes, there's some species of mosquito actually overwinter as adults. I remember once going into a pillbox in Essex, and it was in about this time of year, and it was full of mosquitoes, all sat on the walls. And I believe they're all females from what I've read around. There'll be females that have already mated, the males have died, and in spring they'll fly off, find some temporary pool to lay their eggs in, depending on the species. Of course, some of them will overwinter as larvae in the pond, depending on the species of mosquito. Some midges, winter midges, will actually be flying around as adults this time of year. A cunning plan being, I'm guessing, that a lot of the predators like swallows and martins won't be around. They're all in Africa at the moment, of course, and the bats will be hibernating, so there's less predators around. Stoneflies, a lot of stoneflies do something similar as well. They crawl out onto the rocks around streams. Sadly, we don't get many in Essex. They're more sort of a Scottish Highlands type thing. But what happens when the pond freezes? A lot of these animals, like water beetles, water scorpions, water boatmen, they all breathe air. So if the pond freezes over, you think, okay, they're going to die because they can't get to the surface. But they've evolved in this habitat, so they found ways around it. They'll dive down into the deeper water, so they're safe from freezing. And if you look closely at the underside of a water boatman and the underside of some of the water beetles, under the wing cases of diving beetles, under the wings of water scorpions, they actually have a bubble of air which acts as a source of oxygen. Now, if they're not active, they don't need that much oxygen. But this bubble, due to physics and diffusion, which I'm not going to get too into because I'm a biologist, not a physicist, oxygen will flow in as they use up the oxygen. That means there's less oxygen in the bubble. And due to the laws of equilibrium, the oxygen will flow across the bubble surface into the bubble, and carbon dioxide will flow out. So it acts as what's called a physical gill. So that's quite clever. And of course, as temperature drops, water holds more oxygen. So they survive that way. Yeah, it's all rather clever stuff, really. Caddis flies, which are these small sort of caterpillar-like animals. They look like moths when they're adults, but the larvae build these little cases. Most species build a little case, a silk tube, and they're sticky for stones or vegetation or leaves or something on there. They all sometimes seal themselves in the case for winter. I do tend to find them more in winter. And there's a creature called a phantom midge larva, which is about a centimetre long, which is ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch, completely transparent, and they're overwinter as larvae. And I quite often find lots in winter in the ponds. They tend to feed on water fleas and stuff. I think I'll cover those at more detail another time. Sometimes, not so commonly in the southeast here, it also snows. So the pond freezes over, then you get snow on the top. Now, if it's no snow, the light can get through the ice. The plants keep carrying out photosynthesis, obviously at a slower rate, putting oxygen in the water, taking out carbon dioxide. Animals have got plenty to breathe. But when it snows, obviously it gets darker, and the plants start photosynthesizing, and they could possibly die and start to rot, using up more oxygen. And a lot of these animals, as mentioned, will then perish as the oxygen level drops. But there's one particular specialist of these sorts of ponds, and that is the pond olive mayfly. I'm going to attempt the Latin name, Cloendipterum. This creature, they noticed in a lot of Swedish ponds that it was surviving, and it was pretty much the only thing in there in a lot of these ponds that are frozen over in winter. And they did some research into this. Some quite fascinating. There's quite a few papers if you look around. They have basically adapted to survive without oxygen in the water up to 3 or 4 months in Antarctic winter water. As long as the water's near zero, so they don't need too much oxygen, they'll swim up to the underside of the ice, and when there's a thin layer of water that have a slightly more oxygen, which is sort of seeping through the ice there. They've got a high tolerance of hydrogen sulfide. Now, when you run, well, you do a lot of exercise, don't you?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Or if you're like me and walk up the stairs, your legs start to ache because of lactic acid build up, and that's from anaerobic respiration. So instead of using oxygen to breathe, effectively using chemicals, other chemicals, and they can use that as well to supplement their respiration. And they did a few experiments, and 50% of these nymphs survived 130 days in anoxic conditions at zero.
Wow.
Which is quite impressive, really.
That is impressive.
So basically, yeah, they use a sugar, sort of glucose stuff instead of oxygen when they respire. It says, reading around research, is they actually store up glucose during the autumn to do this. But they're amazing animals. I mean, they have some other little adaptations because most mayflies live in flowing water with high oxygen and stuff like this. And you find them in Northern Europe or Southern Europe. These guys have basically spread across the entire of Eurasia, quite across Europe and Asia. They're one of the most widespread species of mayfly. Because they live in ponds, what they'll do is, as adults, mayflies are famous for only living a day, whereas these guys will live for a month, and they go along, and as they lay their eggs, they instantly hatch in each pond, so they can spread around lots of ponds as well. It's just amazing little creatures. I have to go into more depth with them at some point.
So I'm sure we'll do another kind of pond creatures episode anyway, at least one, if not more.
I think they're the ultimate winter survivor of ponds. But I shall then hand over to you, I think, for some stuff on our little slimy amphibian friends.
Well, I can't call them slimy.
Slimy, well, it's not an insult. Slime is useful.
They are a bit slimy.
Kids are down with the slime, isn't it? Cool at the moment, so Isn't slime
I'll
the in thing? It's probably not anymore.
I'll
Being an
take your
adult.
word for it, Neil.
Yeah.
um,
Mucus
mucus.
is
So
another.
yeah,
Oh,
we
I
do.
take my word. Sorry. Yes, I thought you meant a word for it.
um, yeah, completely disturbed my trail of thought there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually a common question that actually comes up quite a lot. What happens to our amphibians in the winter? I mean, obviously we see them in the spring when they come out in large numbers to breed, and then they disperse. And we see the babies in kind of all the froglets, toadlets, newtlets, whatever, in June and July, and then maybe we see a few more throughout the year. But generally speaking, we don't see them in the winter. And a lot of people have actually asked me what happens to them in the winter. And our native amphibians, so our frogs and our toads, and to our frogs, our newts and our toads, they all hibernate, and actually they can't survive freezing. Not our native species. I will briefly mention an amazing, couple of species that can survive a bit later. But I'll touch on toads first, because toads don't actually overwinter in the bottom of ponds. So they will find damp places in our gardens, in nature reserves, generally anywhere that's kind of damp, particularly kind of rotting wood is a favoured site for them. And they'll actually hibernate in there over winter, and then re-emerge in the spring when temperatures start to warm up. But what happens with frogs and newts is a proportion of them will actually overwinter in the ponds. Those that don't will pretty much do the same that toads do, and they'll find kind of damp areas of the garden, also under paving slabs, greenhouses, sheds, which is why people actually tend to find them there in the winter. But for those that actually use the ponds, they'll actually go to the bottom of the pond, and they'll kind of hide in the leaf litter at the bottom of the pond, be it a big one or a small one, and they'll stay there. And they can actually tolerate really low oxygen levels, but can only survive a few days if the water becomes deoxygenated. Because of where we are, our ponds don't really freeze for long periods. We might get 1 or 2 days where they freeze over completely, and for the larger ponds they might not even freeze over totally. But if we do get really cold spells, you may remember a couple of years ago we had the beast from the east hit in March. This was bang, right at the peak of the breeding season for our amphibians, and yeah, a lot of the ponds did become completely frozen over, and with quite thick ice as well. And not only that, we then had all the snow, and that actually means that the light can't get to the plants, so they're not photosynthesizing, they're not producing the oxygen, and the water can become deoxygenated. Now, so we're lucky here that it doesn't normally last for more than a couple of days, but if it does, and there's one particular area that I go to quite a lot, and actually a week after that big storm hit, there was still a lot of ice and a lot of snow around, right up on top of the Mendips there. And it can cause big problems, especially if they've actually come out of hibernation, at that point. And I think we I'll kind of touch on what to do or how to help ponds when it freezes over. But something that's actually really interesting is that the majority of our common frogs, they breed in the springtime. They lay their spawn we get tadpoles, and in June and July, the majority of those tadpoles have metamorphosed into little froglets, which then leave the pond and they go off and feed, and often into the gardens and wildlife and that, into habitats. But there's a small number of tadpoles that actually don't metamorphose, and they will actually overwinter as tadpoles in the ponds, and come spring they'll actually metamorphose and then leave the ponds as froglets, a little bit earlier than we would normally see them in kind of June and July. And we don't really know what the survival rate of these tadpoles are, and we don't know why a small majority will overwinter as tadpoles.
Yeah, I believe they come out slightly bigger from what I've been told as well.
They do.
As you would expect, yeah.
I mean, I know I think when I last checked, probably about September time when I last saw them, I still had about 3 or 4 tadpoles in my pond, and I've only got a little pond. It's maybe around about 1 meter square, so it's only a little pond, but it's enough for the frogs to breed in. And I still had about 3 or 4 tadpoles in there in September. So if they survive the winter, and so far it's been really mild, then
Mm.
hopefully they'll continue. They'll complete their metamorphosis and actually come out as little froglets,
So
in late spring.
I do remember a few years ago, um, we had a very dry spring, which meant the newts migrated to the ponds later than they normally would, which meant we had egg laying until later. And there was quite a few newt tadpoles in the pond over winter. I'd dip every so often, and I would find the smooth newts either. And yeah, I think they did metamorphose in the end, from what I can see. And of course, I mentioned before the podcast too, didn't I? There was a documentary, I'm sure it's a David Attenborough one, where they talk about common toads we have in the UK, across most of the country, in Scotland, because they breed a bit later and it's a bit cooler, so the tadpoles develop slower. Overwintering as tadpoles and emerging the next year is almost the norm in some sort of highland areas in Scotland. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I haven't been able to find anything else out about that. So if anyone does know anything about that, please get in contact.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, if they don't fully develop during the summer, then they'll
Mm.
tend to overwinter as tadpoles and come out, the next year. So, assuming they survive,
Mm.
survive the winter. But as I said, our native amphibians can't actually survive freezing, but there are some species of frog that can actually withstand freezing altogether.
Oh yes.
And I know, you mentioned, Neil, about like glucose levels in some of the little pond creatures. Well, these particular frogs have high concentrations of glucose, which actually acts as a natural antifreeze.
Yes. A
But
lot of the invertebrates
sometimes
do that. Yeah.
their hearts can actually stop beating, they stop breathing, and for all intents and purposes, they look like they're dead. But once they thaw out, the frog actually comes back to life again. So, they can actually withstand freezing
Mm.
to a point, which is absolutely incredible. I think that's amazing. Yeah, but our native amphibians actually can't do that, unfortunately.
No, it's a lot of our. I don't want to get too in depth. Went a bit short of time, but there's doing a bit of reading on overwintering invertebrates. You have feed avoidance, which is where animals will increase levels of sugars and various other dissolved solids in their bodies to lower the what they call a super cooling point, which is the point at which water will freeze. So salt water freezes at a lower temperature than fresh water, and hypersaline, that really salty water, will freeze at an even lower temperature. So they work on that basis. But there's other creatures that will get rid of as much water as possible, and they're called freeze tolerant creatures. I couldn't find any that actually live in the water, probably because it's hard to get rid of water when you're in water. Freezing kills animals. It can sort of denature enzymes and stuff, so that sort of kills us because we're endothermic. The freezing kills by when water freezes, it expands and that shatters all the cells. So if you get the water out of the cells, or most of it, when the ice crystals form, they don't damage the cells, and a lot of creatures can actually survive that. And I think there's some coronamid midges, and they're not native to the UK though, that can survive this. They get rid of sort of 90% of their water, but I think that's a whole nother topic. I would like to mention the cool surface dwelling bugs. That's your pond skaters and stuff like that. I did a little bit of research on them. There's one called a water cricket, Velia caprii, and there's another species, I forget the name of it. Is it sarii? These are think of pond skaters, but a bit shorter and a bit stouter. They are very closely related to them. You tend to find them more in streams than ponds. They do turn up in woodland ponds especially. As winter approaches, they will crawl. They will hang around the water a bit, but they'll crawl away. Someone found one in a pitfall trap hundreds of meters from any water, so they can't fly, so they must disperse doing this as well. And pond skaters, they all disappear in winter. Some of them in the water crickets, they sort of hedge their bets. They'll have some nymphs, some adults, and some eggs tucked away. So whatever happens, they should survive. Whereas pond skaters, I think they overwinter as adults, but I do believe they go away from the pond. I was trying to find some definitive answers to that. They do seem to disappear from the pond entirely in winter, I've noticed, and come back in spring. But they've got where they lower in the super cooling point with putting lots of sugars in their body fluids and stuff, and various other chemicals. And there's lots of chemicals in water beetles and various other things that we're not entirely sure what they do. There's some research into some of it's sort of anti-predatory, but it does appear there seems to be sort of an antifreeze effect in a lot of the chemicals in a lot of these insects' bodies. So
And I think you look at our wildlife and it has an amazing ability to survive.
it wouldn't be here otherwise.
Well, no, it wouldn't. But it has an amazing ability to survive. These ups and downs and these extremes. I mean, we can go from -10 in the winter to 30 degrees in the summer,
Mm.
and have, you know, 1 week it can be, I mean, I know last year, I think we had a week in February, it was like 18, 19 degrees. So everything started coming out, we had
Mm.
butterflies, invertebrates,
I remember that,
frogs,
yeah.
toads, newts, everything came out. And then we just had a massive downpour of snow and freezing conditions. And okay, it did take its toll. Definitely
Yeah.
took its toll on the amphibian
I had a
population
few
for
dead
sure.
frogs. But I
Um,
imagine I had mating in cop frogs under the ice, which is I've never seen before last year. That was just really weird that winter. But
but it's, I think, it's really interesting. And I think one thing to touch on is if we do, because we're kind of January now, and I know for us,
mm,
February is normally our really cold month. That's when we start to get the real kind of
yeah,
the sub-zero temperatures. So Neil and I thought we might, just give you a few little tips if you've got a garden pond and you want to know what to do if it freezes over or if we have snow. We thought we'd give you a couple of little tips just to kind of help that pond life through those cold times.
the first place I will send you is the Freshwater Habitats Trust, a fantastic charity. It used to be known as Pond Conservation. They are a fab group, and they've got lots of information on how to look after your pond and set it up. And the common questions are, what do I do if it freezes over? Well, if it's a wildlife pond and there's no fish in there, usually the best thing to do is just leave it. If there's snow on top, you might want to clear some of the snow off for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It stops the plants photosynthesizing and can lead to oxygen loss. And there's all sorts of things people say, like float a ball in it and smash the ice a bit. You might want to smash the edge of the ice so foxes and birds can have a bit of a drink. I tend to just put out a bird bath, but I do find actually if you crack the ice in the pond, it stays unfrozen longer than a bird bath if it's sort of -2 or something, so it's going to freeze quickly. As I said, all these animals have evolved to survive this, so they should be okay unless there's something else wrong with your pond. If you've got fish, that's a whole different matter. It's more of a fish care thing. And if you've got fish in a wildlife pond, why? Why? It's not good for all the other animals, but yeah, unless you've got
Uh,
like sticklebacks or something.
oh, well, I'd actually say, the pond that we have at the house that I grew up in, my
Mm,
childhood home, we do have fish in the pond, but the pond has two sides to it, and
yeah.
the shallower side we've actually turned into a wildlife pond, and the fish can't actually get into that side,
Mm.
because the water's too shallow and the fish are too big. They can't actually physically get there anymore, and I do quite frequently see the frogs and the toads in the like the deep end of the pond,
Oh yeah,
but
the adults are fine.
they actually all breed in the shallow end where all the vegetation is. And
Yeah.
I've spent 2 years working on that pond to turn it more into a wildlife pond. So you can get,
Mm.
it can
Oh, you
work.
can. Oh,
We don't have goldfish though. I would say
uh,
that we don't have
yeah.
goldfish.
So goldfish and carp are like including koi, are like the worst things. What in terms of eating the wildlife, breaking the ice, maybe a little bit for the wildlife, but you don't have to.
There's
Like I
no
said,
real research there's no real kind of evidence to say that breaking the ice actually makes that much of a difference.
some people say put a pump in, which will stop the ice freezing. But what happens in winter is you get sort of, the top layer is exposed to the coldest air, but the ice acts as an insulator, like a blanket almost, and keeps the water below it liquid and a little bit warmer. So that's what everything's evolved to deal with. Whereas pond creatures don't do so well with flowing water as well. So, just leave it be and maybe clear off the snow seems to be the best
Yeah,
advice.
if we get snow, clear the snow away from. You don't have to clear the snow away from the whole pond. Just clear it
Yeah.
away from the plants so they can still photosynthesize. Because even in our winter sun, it might not be that strong. It's still enough for the plants to photosynthesize to a point. Yeah, Neil mentioned about the Pond Life website. If you're more kind of into amphibians, it's worth having a look at Frog Life as well because they've got some great tips for
Oh yeah.
looking after your ponds, and also creating different habitats depending on what you're kind of looking at. So Frog Life's another really good website just to pop on, and there's loads of information on there as well to help you with your pond.
Random slight tangent. Do you know Frog Life used to have a frog helpline before the web was a major thing? Because a chap called Jules Howard, who wrote the recently published Wildlife Pond book, was very good, I have to mention. He's not paying me a commission on this either. I've never actually met him in person, but I've spoken to him online many times. But he used to man the phone line, this Jules Howard chap. So he also did a podcast on a little pond he had, So that's worth checking out. If you Google Jules Howard Pond, it should come on podcast. It should come up. There's lots of little short 20 minutes ones. What turns up in his a little sink pond. It's amazing what you can get in just a little sink pond.
Yeah, well, I think maybe we can cover pond creation for
Yes.
different gardens, and that's definitely a whole episode that we can have a look into, I think.
I think so. Well, I think we better start wrapping up because I think we've gone over the hour mark. Oh yes, we have gone over the hour mark, and frankly, I can't bother to edit too much more than that. So I think we just need to finish up by saying, first of all, thank you for everyone for listening. Spread the word. If you have any questions, please just write in on wildlife, preferably. As long as it's not where babies come from. If so, ask your parents. Yeah, check us out. We're on Facebook under UK Wildlife Podcasts, unsurprisingly. On Twitter under @UK Wildlife Pod, and you can find me on Twitter and Facebook, but my website's uk-wildlife.co.uk, and you can find all my other contacts on there. Anything else, Victoria?
Just so we've loved having kind of some feedback and also the questions, so please do keep sending them in, and we'll try our very best to get them answered for you in up and coming episodes. If you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag UK Wildlife Podcast. That actually helps us find the questions a lot more easily, and then we can answer them. You can ask us questions on there as well, and we'll answer them on there. Keep you up to date with various things as well. And yeah, so Neil said you can find us both on Twitter. Our Twitter handles are actually on the UK Wildlife Podcast page, and my website's vixpics.com, where you can find out all about what I'm up to as well. So yeah, just echoing what Neil said, thank you very much for listening, and also I'd like to wish everyone a very happy new year as well.
Indeed, we should have started the show with that, but there we go.
We should. There we go.
maybe from the magic of editing, I can put it at the start. Nope, can't bother. Right. Right. Well, we'll see you all next time.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.